We are going to slide over to the pot where Mr. Ross Halpern's standing by. He's the author of a book called Bear Witness, The Pursuit of Justice in a Violent Land. Welcome him now. Hi, Ross.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
I love the book. I loved it so much. And, I couldn't help while I was reading, and Honduras, I think, is notoriously a scary place to begin with. But I couldn't help, I don't mean to laugh, but I couldn't help thinking about all of these people standing there with their Gucci bags and their hair done and their nails and their, name brand tennis shoes saying, I'm oppressed in the United States of America. I'm like, please go to Honduras for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, this is a country, I think besides Haiti, it's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And it struggled with a lot of things, obviously violence, corruption being two themes that come up a lot in my book. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things I really admire about my two protagonists is that they sort of bravely take that all on. And instead of saying, man, this is hopeless and these problems are insurmountable, they say, we ourselves are going to do our best to fix this, and that's quite a courageous thing to do. Well,
and he's talking about a man who was a Honduran school teacher, Carlos Hernandez, off the top of my head, okay, and an American sociologist, Kurt Van Beek. They just said, we're doing the dang thing.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, they spent a lot of time down there before they started doing this very idiosyncratic and dangerous work. And, as young men,
but they took their families.
Yeah. I think that's part of what makes it pretty amazing. I mean, they devoted their lives to helping the poor, and the first thing that they do is move to one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Honduras. But they're not alone. They both have wife and kids at the time, and this is where they decide to raise them. And, they manage to be family men alongside doing this dangerous work.
It's astounding. It's absolutely astounding. You read the book and you're like, wow, these guys should have been written about. I'm glad you did it.
Yeah, I mean, that was the sort of feeling that I had when I first started working on this. I hadn't done any journalism before. I was working for criminologists, and I heard Kurt tell his story at a conference about homicide in New York City, and it was exactly that feeling. It was just like, wow, this is both very revealing, I think, about some of the crime and impunity problems happening in the U.S., and it's just a fascinating story in terms of all that happened and the people involved, and I'd love to see a book about that. So that's
I'm looking at
exactly
one.
this. Yeah. It took a while. I mean, this was 7 years of work. So, but that's how it started.
It's called Bear Witness: The Pursuit of Justice in a Violent Land. It's available everywhere, right?
Yeah, it's coming out tomorrow. So obviously, anywhere books are sold.
I got you before it came out. That's amazing. Go me. All right. So, well, reading this book, it's one of those where you don't want to be interrupted, because if somebody says, "Ma, can I have a popsicle?" in the middle of this torrent of emotion you're going through while you're reading this book, it's going to be a problem. So find a little nook and cranny somewhere and just go read it without interruption, because I mean it's more than bearing witness. It's more than the Christianity. I mean, they were almost like undercover cops.
Yeah, I think the radical insight they arrived to pretty early on in the book is there's all these people doing humanitarian work all over the world, right. Education, healthcare, water, and they do a lot of that. But they get to a point where they realize that in dangerous neighborhoods like where they live, none of that is really going to have that much of an effect if there's gangs extorting people, murdering people, and raping people with impunity. Mm-hmm. And so they shift gears and they say, we are going to take on crime. And the way that they do that is by solving homicides. Yeah. So they hire a private eye and a lawyer, and they start doing detective work, which, traditionally is done by the government, but in Honduras wasn't happening.
Well, it's because they were corrupt. So were the police.
Yeah, they were corrupt, they were broke, they didn't have vehicles, and frankly, they were scared themselves to even go in this neighborhood. It was a huge risk to them to even enter Nueva Sillapa. So police work wasn't happening, and this gang called the Puchos was basically operating with total impunity. And Kurt and Carlos, the protagonists of the book, say, we've had enough of that. So they start solving homicides, and I think one of the most interesting things they figure out is in the real world, solving homicides is rarely about, ingenious detective making a deduction or some crazy CSI discovery, although that's what we see on TV all the time. In reality, it usually boils down to witnesses. And is there a witness who knows what happened, and is that witness willing to testify? So what they focus on... what they focus on is how do we cultivate those people and protect them both physically and psychologically and emotionally such that they're willing to participate in a legal process.
Yeah. So the Association for a More Just Society, I mean, they can back you all day, but when you're in, you said it very eloquently, Tegucigalpa? The whole book, I probably said that wrong in my head.
It's definitely a mouthful. Tegucigalpa. It's the capital city. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, they didn't shy away from anything, and I know they had Christian hearts. So when you think about people who have Christian hearts, not all of us who are Christian have the bravery of Jesus. And these guys leaned in kind of like he did. I mean, they just went for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kurt especially, he looks at the Bible and what he sees is a story of extreme courage of people putting their lives on the line. When he looks at Jesus and the earliest Christians, people who were willing to die for what they believed in. And he feels that modern Christianity has lost a lot of that spirit. And part of what they're trying to do is bring that back. Yeah. And that's a matter of him and his partner Carlos being brave. It's a matter of pushing his staff to be brave. And it's a matter, as I said, pushing people like the witnesses in their community to be brave. So in some ways, it all derives from his feelings about his Christian theology.
And you know what? This is almost a handbook for what we need to do in America, for places where people are being victimized repeatedly over and over and over by the same gangster-like people. They just won't talk out of fear. And I mean, it takes unflinching courage to be able to get people to do stuff like that, because you've got to let them know we got your back if you have ours. I mean, trying to convince people to do stuff like that is not a small thing.
Oh my God, no, it's extremely difficult. And yeah, I think something you said is really important, and maybe it's something some of your listeners don't appreciate, which is impunity in the United States is a big problem too. You know, in most wealthy countries in Europe or Asia, well over 90% of murders are solved. Whereas in the U.S., that number is probably between 50, 60%, something like that. And the solve rate for non-fatal shootings is even lower. And it all gets back to the same issue you referenced, which is in a lot of places, witnesses don't want to cooperate with the legal process. And that somewhat is a matter of fear of retribution. It's somewhat a matter of not trusting the cops and prosecutors who administer those processes. So it's a problem here as well. And as you say, it's super hard to convince witnesses and make them feel comfortable. And in the book, they learn the ins and outs of that, and they get better and better at over time. And one of the fascinating things that happens is they start off with a private eye and a lawyer, but eventually they really come to appreciate the emotional and psychological strain that it is to be a witness when you're forced to be part of this process that can sometimes drag on for months or years. So they actually hire a psychologist to work alongside those other two team members, and the psychologist, works directly with the witnesses to make them feel better and hear their concerns and add additional element to the process.
Yeah, and the book is Bear Witness, The Pursuit of Justice in a Violent Land, Ross Halpern. It's coming out tomorrow, you said. But what I find remarkable in this whole thing is, you can change the heart of a few people, but you can't change the mindset of a country. And Honduras has been notoriously dangerous forever. I mean, forever. This is not a new thing. So to try to go in and make a change, well, frankly, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think what they're doing can often feel like it is on the edge of craziness. And the book starts off in this one community, as you know, Nueva Suyapa, where they live with their families. But it actually gets bigger as the book goes on, and they do take on the project of trying to change the whole country. Mm-hmm. And, they say, we are going to try to transform the police force in this country, which is one of the most notorious police forces in the world. We are going to try to change the prosecutor's office. And that is something that, when they set out to do it, probably did seem quixotic to a lot of people and impossible, but pretty incredibly, they rise from obscurity in the small neighborhood to being extremely powerful people in the country who are operating in the highest echelons of politics alongside presidents and attorney generals. And while they do make some impressive progress, they towards improving the police and the educational system and the health system, they're forced to make some compromises and frankly get enmeshed in the country's politics, which is something they try to avoid, but is something that is unavoidable when you're in that realm.
Yeah, can you send them to St. Louis? I mean, I'm just saying that'd be great, because we can't seem to get crime solved there either, because in a lot of places that are like Honduras, a lot of times they like to make the people who are the criminals the victims, so that they look like, they should be pitied and whatever. But they need to be feared, because once they get away with it and nothing happens, that emboldens them to do it more. And in a country like Honduras, there was nobody stopping them, so they just kept getting more and more violent and just like a plague. And once that happens, they take over your children, and Christianity dies, and everything that makes sense in your life becomes nonsense, and it's a very scary thing. So these guys are nothing short of, we should almost canonize them.
Yeah, no, I think you're right in the sense of how violence takes over everything.
It does.
And makes it impossible to prosper economically and frankly relax, and it increases your level of stress, and it affects your health. And I think the ambiance in a neighborhood like Nueva Suyapa that I write about was totally captured by these fears. And yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see how the ideas that they developed down in Honduras could be applicable to places with similar problems in the United States.
Well, they didn't run in with AR-15 saying, knock it off, la, la, la. They went in with words and faith and prayer and trust and building. I mean, it took forever to do, I'm sure, but I mean, the way that they went about it is almost unheard of.
I think it absolutely is unheard of, and I think you're touching on one of the most fascinating aspects of it. A lot of the people, especially from the charity or humanitarian world, who get involved and say, okay, we want to reduce crime, they often go through other means. So they'll look at, mentorship programs or other things like that are a little bit less direct than just stopping crime. And I think what these guys did is say, we're going to reduce crime by, punishing criminals, but, in a fair way. And I think another important thing for readers to appreciate is there was another alternative in Honduras at the time, which was vigilantism. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't too unusual for people in these communities to take up arms and essentially just start murdering criminals. And that was done independently, and it was also done supposedly in a clandestine way by the police. so Kurt and Carlos were trying to find a middle ground between doing nothing and doing something that was murder, extremely harsh. And that was how this program came to be.
Yeah. And you quote James, faith without works is dead. And that I think is the crux of everything that is in your book, is that their faith was so strong. They believed they could do it. So they did.
Yeah. And that quote really resonates with, I think, Carlos's feeling. I mean, he, was a member of a pretty, I think, traditional evangelical church, and he felt that his the leaders and the missionaries coming down there were too focused on the afterlife and too focused on the spiritual aspects of his faith. And sort of his religious crisis as a young man was really around, I want to do more works. I want to do more where I live in my country with my people to improve their plight. So,
and it's a fascinating book. I wish I had more time. Ross Halpern's the author. You can find Bear Witness starting tomorrow, where all good books are sold. The Pursuit of Justice in a Violent Land. You're going to learn a lot about your own heart when you're reading this book. And I think, Ross, you did a fantastic job. It's a great book. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me and reading the book. I really, really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I loved it. Bye-bye.